Supreme effort. What is meant by supreme effort? It means a level of effort beyond what is necessary to achieve a given purpose. Imagine that you have been walking all day, and that you are very tired. The weather is bad, it is raining and cold. In the evening, you arrive home and have walked perhaps 25 miles. In the house, there is supper waiting, it is warm and pleasant. However, instead of sitting down to supper, you decide to go back out into the rain again, walk another 2 miles along the road and then return to the house. That is supreme effort. When you were going home, that was simply ordinary effort, and this does not count, because you were on your way home anyway, so the cold, the rain and the hunger, all this made you walk. In the second case, you walked simply because you yourself decided to walk, and not for any other reason. This kind of super effort becomes still more difficult when you do not decide upon it yourself, and obey a teacher, who at an unexpected moment, requires you to make fresh effort, when you have already decided that effort from you for the day is over. Another kind of supreme effort involves carrying out any form of work at a faster rate than is called for by the nature of the work. You are doing something, say for example washing up or chopping wood. You have an hour's work ahead of you, but do it in half an hour, this would be supreme effort. In actual practice, however, people can rarely, if ever, bring themselves to make supreme effort, consecutively, even for a long period of time. To do this, another person's will is necessary, which should have no pity, and some sort of method. If a person were able to work on themselves, then everything would be fairly simple, and schools would be unnecessary. However, we cannot, and the reason for this lies deep within our nature. We can leave for the moment any insincerity with ourselves, the perpetual lies we tell ourselves and so on, taking only the division of centers. This alone makes independent work on ourselves impossible. We must understand that the three principal centers, our thinking, emotional and moving, are connected together, and in a normal person, they are always working in unison. This union is what presents the chief difficulty in work on oneself. What is meant by this unison? It means that a definite work of the thinking center is connected with a definite work of the emotional and moving centers, which means that a certain kind of thought is inevitably connected with a certain kind of emotional or mental state, and with a certain kind of movement or posture. One evokes the other, that is, a certain kind of emotional mental state evokes certain movements and postures, certain thoughts, a certain kind of reaction, stance or gesture evokes certain emotions and mental states. These are called neurological language patterns. Everything is connected, and one thing cannot exist without another. Imagine that a person decides to try to think in a new kind of way. However, they continue to feel in the old way. Let's say that they dislike Fred, and that this dislike of Fred immediately arouses within them old thoughts, old associations that make them forget all about the decision to think in a new way. Or let's suppose that they are accustomed to smoking cigarettes while they are thinking, which is a moving habit, and they now decide to think in a new kind of way, beginning by lighting a cigarette. They think in the old way without even noticing it. The habitual movement of lighting a cigarette has turned their thoughts around to the old tune. You must remember that someone can never break this accord by themselves, another's will is necessary, and a stick is necessary. All that a person desiring to work on themselves can do, at a certain stage of their work, is obey. They can do nothing alone. More than anything else, we require constant supervision and observation. We cannot observe ourselves constantly. Then we need definite rules, the fulfillment of which, in the first place, requires a certain kind of self-remembering, and which, in the second place, helps in the struggle with habits. One cannot do all of this by themselves, as in life everything is always arranged too comfortably for anyone to work. In a school, a person finds themselves among people who are not of their own choosing, and with whom perhaps it is difficult to live and work, plus of course they are in unusually uncomfortable and unaccustomed conditions. This creates tension between them and the others. It is this tension that becomes indispensable, because it gradually chips away at their sharp edges. Then work on the moving center can only be properly organized in a school, because the wrong, independent or automatic work of the moving center deprives the other centers of support, and they involuntarily follow the moving center. Often the only way to make the other centers work in a new way is to begin with the moving center, with the body. A body that is lazy, automatic and full of stupid habits, prevents any kind of work. Opposing theories state that a person ought to develop the spiritual and moral side of their nature first, and that if they attain results in this direction, then there will be no impediment on the part of their body. This is, however, only partly true, because the key lies within the word if. If someone attains perfection of a moral and spiritual nature, without hindrance on the part of their body, then the body will not interfere with further achievements. Unfortunately, however, this rarely occurs, because the body interferes at the very first step, interferes by its automatism, its attachment to habits, and chiefly by its wrong function. If development of our moral and spiritual nature, without interference on the part of the body, is theoretically possible, then it is possible only in the case of an ideally functioning body. But who is able to say that their body functions ideally? Aside from this, there is an inherent deception in the words moral and spiritual themselves. It has often been explained that in speaking of machines, one cannot begin with their morality, or their spirituality, but must begin with their mechanicalness, and the laws governing this mechanicalness. The being of man number 1, number 2 and number 3 is the being of machines, mechanisms that are able to cease being machines, but have not as yet ceased being mechanical. Is it possible for us to transpose from one stage of being to another, simply through a wave of emotion, spontaneous or perhaps induced? Again, we are using different terminology. A wave of emotion is indispensable, however it cannot change moving habits, and it cannot, of itself, make centers work correctly, which all of their lives have been working incorrectly. To change and repair this takes specialized and lengthy work. Then if we talk of transposition to another level of being, from this point of view, a person in the true sense does not exist. We are speaking of a mechanism, consisting of a whole series of very complex parts. A wave of emotion takes place in one part, however the other parts may not be affected at all. No miracles are possible in a machine, it is miraculous enough that a machine is able to change, because all laws cannot be violated. But what of the robber on the cross, who was crucified next to Jesus? This is another thing entirely, and illustrates an altogether different idea, as in the first place it took place on the cross, that is in the midst of terrible suffering, to which ordinary life holds no equal. Then secondly, it took place at the moment of death, which refers to the hermetic idea of someone's last thoughts and feelings at the moment of death. In life thoughts pass by, and are replaced by other habitual thoughts. There can be no prolonged wave of emotion in life, no last breath, and therefore it cannot give rise to any change of being. It must be emphasized that we are not speaking of exceptions or accident, that may or may not occur, but of general principles, and of what happens every day, to everyone. Ordinary people, even if they come to the conclusion that work on themselves is indispensable, are slaves to their bodies. We are not only slave to the unrecognized and invisible activities of our bodies, but it is precisely these things that hold us in their power. Therefore, when someone decides to struggle for freedom, they have first of all to struggle with their own body. An aspect of function in the human body, that has to be regulated, is worth noting here, because as long as this function goes on in the wrong manner, then no other kind of work, either moral or spiritual, can go on in the right way either. The work of the three-story factory has been spoken of previously, where it was pointed out that most of the energy produced by that factory is squandered carelessly. Among other things, energy is wasted on unnecessary muscular tension. This muscular tension eats up an enormous amount of energy, and with work on oneself, attention must first be turned to this inefficiency, which can be identified as tight shoulders and a stiff neck. How often do we need a neck or a shoulder rub and experience tension in our upper back? When this happens, we inevitably complain of being exhausted and feeling drained of all energy. In speaking of work on the factory in general, it is therefore necessary to stop this useless waste, before there can be any logical increase in production. If production is increased, while this waste persists, and nothing is done to stop it, then the new energy produced will simply increase the waste, and may even give rise to phenomena of an unhealthy nature such as cancer and uncontrolled growth. One of the first things that a person must learn, therefore, prior to any physical work on themselves, is to observe and feel muscular tension. Then to be able to relax their muscles when it is necessary to do so, or to relax unrequired tension in muscle groups. There are exercises and postures adopted in schools, when praying or contemplating, that someone can practice, if they learn to relax this inappropriate tension. Among these is the so-called posture of the Buddha, with feet resting on the knees, or one knee in the lotus position. There are many exercises for gradually relaxing our muscles, always beginning with the muscles of the face first, as well as exercises for feeling the hands and feet, the fingers and so on, at will. These are covered in any literature on yoga. An exercise worth attempting involves circular sensation, where the subject lies with their back on the floor, and while attempting to relax all of their muscles, concentrates attention first on the nose, and the sensation of breathing. When this is accomplished, the subject then shifts attention to their ear. Then the right hand, the right foot, from the right to the left foot, then the left hand, and back to the left ear, nose and so on. Experiments such as this attempt to feel the pulse throughout the entire body, which is what we do not feel in ordinary conditions. Feeling the pulse throughout the whole body, as one stroke, can be brought about through breath or vipassana meditation. Control of the body begins with control over our pulse, and acquiring, at least for a short time, the possibility of regulating, quickening or slowing our pulse. Control of the heart does not come from the heart muscles, but is dependent upon controlling our pulse, the second stroke of the big heart. Control of the big heart depends upon controlling the tension of our muscles, because we do not possess this control normally, chiefly as a consequence of the wrong and irregular tension of various groups of muscles. Exercise in this manner can relieve neuralgic pain. Whoever does them seriously, very quickly notices that their sleep becomes sounder, and that they require fewer hours of rest daily. Every race, every nation, every epoch, every country, every class and every profession, has its own definite number of postures and movements. These postures and movements are things that become the most permanent and unchangeable in us. They control our form of thought, and our form of feeling. However, we never make use of all the postures and movements possible for us, and in accordance with our individuality, adopt only a certain number of these postures and movements that are possible. The individual's repertoire of postures and movements therefore become limited and designate their signature moves. The character of the movements and postures in every epoch, in every race, and in every class, is inextricably connected with definite forms of thinking and feeling. Someone is unable to change the form of their thinking, of their feeling, until they have changed their repertoire of postures and movements. The forms of thinking and feeling can also be called the postures and movements of thinking and feeling. Everyone has a definite number of thinking and feeling postures and movements. Furthermore, thinking, feeling and moving postures are connected with one another in us, and we can never escape this repertoire of thinking and feeling postures, unless we first change our moving postures. An analysis of a person's thoughts and feelings, together with a study of their moving functions, arranged in a certain manner, will show that every one of our movements, whether voluntary or involuntary, is an unconscious transition from one posture to another, all equally mechanical in their nature. It is an illusion to say that our movements are voluntary. All of our movements are automatic, our thoughts and feelings are just as automatic. This automatism of thought and feeling is connected with the automatism of movement. One cannot be changed without the other, so that if someone's attention is concentrated, let's say they are changing automatic thoughts, then the usual habitual movements and habitual postures will interfere with this new course of thought by attaching to it old habitual associations. In ordinary conditions, we have no concept about how much our thinking, moving and feeling functions depend upon one another, although we know at the same time how much our moods and our emotional states can depend upon our movement and postures. We all feel grumpy when we're tired, and sleep badly when we're exhausted. If someone takes a posture, which for them corresponds to a feeling of sadness or despondency, then within a short time they are sure to feel sad or despondent. Fear, disgust, nervous agitation, or on the other hand, calm and composure, can be created by an intentional change of posture. However, as each person's function, thinking, emotion and movement, have their own repertoires, all of which are in constant interaction, we can never get out of the charmed circle of their existence. Even if someone recognizes this, and begins to struggle with it, their will is not sufficiently strong, as a person's will is sufficient to govern only one center, and then only for a short period of time. The other two centers prevent this, and our will can never be sufficient to govern all three centers at once. In order to oppose this automatism, and then gradually acquire control over postures and movements in different centers, there is one special exercise, known as the stop game. At a word or sign previously agreed upon with the teacher, all the pupils who see or hear this have to arrest their movements at once, no matter what they are doing, and freeze in that position in which the signal has caught them. Furthermore, not only must they cease to move, but they must keep their eyes on the same spot at which they were looking when the signal was given, retain the smile on their faces, if there was one, keep their mouth open, if they were speaking, maintain the facial expression and tension of all muscles of their body, in exactly the same position in which they were caught by the signal. In this frozen state, a person must also stop the flow of their thoughts, and concentrate the whole of their attention on preserving the tension of the muscles in the various parts of their body, exactly as it was. Watching this tension all the time, and leading, so to speak, their attention from one part of the body to another. They must remain in this state, and in this position, until another agreed-upon signal allows them to adopt a customary posture, or until they drop from fatigue, through being unable to preserve the original posture any longer. They have no permission to change anything in it, neither their glance, points of support, nothing. If they cannot stand, then they must fall, but again they should fall like a sack, without attempting to protect themselves from any blow. In exactly the same manner, if they were holding something in their hands, then they must hold it as long as they are able to do so, and if their hand refuses to obey them, and the object falls, then it is not their fault. It is the duty of the teacher to ensure that no personal injury occurs from falling, or from unaccustomed postures, and in this regard the pupil must trust the teacher fully, and not think of any danger, such as in a trust fall. The idea of the exercise and its results differ greatly. Taking it first, from the point of view of the study of movement and postures, the exercise affords a person the possibility of getting out of the circle of automatism, and it cannot be dispensed with, particularly at the beginning of work on oneself. A non-mechanical study of oneself is only possible with the help of a similar stop or freeze exercise. Attempting to follow through then on what occurs, a person is walking or sitting, working at something, and at that moment they hear the signal. A movement that has begun is interrupted by this sudden signal, or command to stop. Their body becomes immovable, and arrested in the midst of transition, from one posture to another, in a position in which it never remains in ordinary life. Feeling themselves in this state, in an unaccustomed posture, the person involuntarily looks at themselves from new points of view, seeing and observing themselves in a new way. In this unaccustomed posture, they are able to think in a new manner, feel something different, and discover something previously not experienced about themselves. In the exercise, the circle of old automatism is broken. The body tries in vain to adopt an ordinary comfortable position, however the person's will, called into action through the will of the teacher, prevents this. The struggle in us goes on, not for life but till death, however in this case will is able to conquer for a short time. The exercise, taken together with all that has been said, is an exercise in self-remembering. A person must remember themselves so as not to miss the signal. They must remember themselves so as not to take the most comfortable position at the first moment. They must remember themselves in order to watch the tension of the muscles in different parts of their body, the direction in which they are looking, their facial expression, chain of thought and so on. They must remember themselves in order to overcome considerable pain or discomfort, sometimes from the unaccustomed position of legs, arms and back, so as not to be afraid of falling or dropping something heavy on their foot. It is enough to forget oneself for a single moment, and the body will adapt by itself, almost unnoticeably, assuming a more comfortable position. It will transfer the weight from one foot to another, slacken certain muscles and so on. This exercise is a simultaneous exercise for our will, attention, thoughts, feelings, and for the moving center. It must be understood that in order to bring to bear sufficient strength of will, to keep someone in an unaccustomed position, an order or command from the outside to stop is indispensable. Someone cannot give themselves the command to stop, their will cannot obey the command. The reason for this is the combination of habitual thinking, feeling and moving postures that are stronger than anyone's will. The command stop, that comes from outside, takes the place of our thinking and feeling postures. These postures and their influence are removed by the command stop, and in this case, our moving postures obey that external will.